back in, we'll know that they were stuck in a breakout room somewhere. Okay. Well, I hope you had some good conversation. We certainly did in the main room. And I think one of the things that stands out the most is that each person really experiences all these stressors in their own way. It can be difficult, figuring out what's each person's story. And it depends on, I think a lot of it depends on how the events that are happening impact each one of us. Did I hear about 1,000 people dying, or did my grandmother die? Did my neighbor lose their job, or did I lose my job? And what if we're already experiencing a lot of stressors in our life? I've heard so many professionals, and I said myself, who have been talking about struggling with focus and being productive at work while managing all the demands of this time. It's something that we need to accept and kind of just recognize that that's normal for this period. Statistics are showing, as we've talked about, the dramatic increase in domestic violence, substance misuse, suicides, child abuse. And you've likely seen a lot of that in your work as well. And this makes sense, that for all of the things that we're going through. All of us, to differing degrees, are really having these alarm bells going off regularly. And if it's not actually being triggered by something happening, we're sort of living in the fear that something may go wrong any moment. So it's natural that we might sometimes struggle to access that productive, creative thinking brain, and we hunker down in survival mode. So why should we care about this? Why should we want to know more? Well, actually, I believe that human resources, that is all of you, all of us, are your agency or organization's greatest asset. I certainly couldn't have done the work that I've done over the past 20 years without the 100+ research assistants that I've had. Turnover and retraining, that's time consuming and expensive. And engendering loyalty and commitment to our work, it goes two ways. This period will end for sure. But what can we learn now that's going to set us up for a stronger future? One key might be about thinking about how do we reframe or interpret what's happening around us. When we see other people or even ourselves struggling at work with time management or focus or behaviors that are different than we know about ourselves, it's easy just to think like, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you, or why aren't I working up to my potential? And this is really where we need to stop and reframe. Stop and think about what's up? What's going on with me? Wondering, what might I be going through? What might I be experiencing that is impacting me? Maybe I have young kids in school, but every day I hear rumors that the schools are going to lock down again. And then what am I going to do with my 6-year-old? Or maybe I have a grandparent in a nursing home. So many of the deaths have been in this population, and we can't visit. Maybe my spouse just lost their job, and now all of the family's finances rest on my shoulders. The future is pretty uncertain, and people have been talking about a new normal, but what in the heck is that going to look like? For some people, returning to the office might mean something different. Like for some, it might bring out anxiety because the person has health issues or they have kids at home. Maybe going back to the office is going to be a relief for some people because their home environment just doesn't provide a good workspace. It's a tough balance, doing our job and being aware of and attentive to the stressors that are faced by ourselves and our coworkers and the people we work with. But there will be another side of the crisis. We know it. So how can I bring my best self to my work and my family and my coworkers and my clients? How can we acknowledge and make space for the very real challenges we're facing and the stress responses that come along with it? We often hear about that talk about like life-work balance. And that's a real challenge these days when work and life are often happening in the same place with little space in between. And then if it is all about work and life balance, where do I fit in the picture? How do I get refilled? We've all heard that analogy about, put your own oxygen mask on first before you help your partner on a flight. And there's some great ideas that we commonly think about in order to do self-care and regain energy. If we were just to throw out, maybe put in the chat, Rochelle will maybe read a few of these things. What are some common ideas about self-care? What are some of the things you do, or at least you know you should be doing for self-care? Let's just, everyone throw something in the chat. We'll see what we come up with. Self-care ideas.
Daily walk, sleep, go to bed, exercise, pet my dogs, boundaries, mountain trips, reading a good book, planning healthy meals, breathing, getting my nails done, exercise. Got a lot of yes to the nails.
Yeah.
I know that's the one good thing about like all these going virtually. Nobody's seen that I have not got my grays covered, you know, for a very long time.
There you go.
Long hot baths, eating healthy.
Great ideas. And I know all of us do all of these every day, right? It's great. We're just amazing. You know, good work. Thank you. There are a lot of things that we can do. And like the video said, in an attempt to kind of counteract the effects of chronic stress. But even some of the strongest self-care plans, you know, they've been blown up by this pandemic. There's kids at home, there's work at home, or both, going back and forth. People have lost jobs, lack of opportunities to see family. A lot of the things that we typically do for self-care just don't work in the same way. So I'd like to perhaps introduce one more way of managing the chronic stress in our times. And it has to do with literally how we think about our situations, how we frame the issues and form our mindset. I've got another video that I'd like to present. It's about 10 minutes to help us think about the way we perceive what's happening around us. Maybe give us another idea on how to manage the chronic stress that we're experiencing. So we'll listen to this and then see what we think.
Hi, everyone. Gosh, I wish I could dance, but I can't, and you really don't want me to. So instead, I thought I would talk a little today about how people think. I'm fascinated by this question. I'm a social psychologist, which basically means I'm a professional people watcher. So this is what I do. I try to figure out how humans think and how we might be able to think better. And here's something I noticed a few years ago about how I seem to think. Here's a typical week in my life, which usually seems to revolve entirely around publishing papers. So here I am in the maximum of my artistic abilities as a stick figure, going along at baseline, and a paper gets accepted. I get this rush, this blip of happiness, and then I'm back to baseline by about lunchtime. A few days later, a paper might get rejected, and that feels pretty awful. And I wait for that blip to end, but somehow I just can't stop thinking about it. And here's the craziest part. Even if another paper gets accepted the next day, well, that's nice, but somehow I can't get that pesky rejection out of my head. So what is going on here? Why does a failure seem to stick in our minds so much longer than a success? Well, together with my colleague, Amber Boydston, in the political science department, I started thinking about this question of, do our minds get stuck in the negatives? We all know intuitively that there are different ways of thinking about things. The same glass, the saying goes, can be seen as half full or half empty. And there's a lot of research in the social sciences showing that depending on how you describe the glass to people, as half full or half empty, it changes how they feel about it. So if you describe the glass as half full, this is called a gain frame because you're focusing on what's gained, then people like it. But if you describe the same glass as half empty, a loss frame, then people don't like it. But we wondered, what happens when you try to switch from thinking about it one way to thinking about it another way? Can people shift back and forth, or do they get stuck in one way of thinking about it? Does one of these labels, in other words, tend to stick more in the mind? Well, to investigate this question, we conducted a simple experiment. We told participants in our experiment about a new surgical procedure, and we randomly assigned them to one of two conditions. For participants in the first condition, the first group, we described the surgical procedure in terms of gains. We said it had a 70% success rate. And for participants in the second group, we described the procedure in terms of losses. We said it had a 30% failure rate. So it's the exact same procedure. We're just focusing people's attention on the part of the glass that's full or the part of the glass that's empty. Perhaps unsurprisingly, people like the procedure when it's described as having a 70% success rate, and they don't like it when it's described as having a 30% failure rate. But then we added a twist. We told participants in the first group, you know, you could think of this as a 30% failure rate. And now they don't like it anymore. They've changed their minds. And we told participants in the second group, you know, you could think of this as a 70% success rate, but unlike the first group, they stuck with their initial opinion. They seemed to be stuck in the initial loss frame that they saw at the beginning of the study. We conducted another experiment. This time we told participants about the current governor of an important state who was running for re-election against his opponent. We again had two groups of participants, and we described the current governor's track record to them in one of two ways. We said that when the current governor took office, statewide budget cuts were expected to affect about 10,000 jobs. And then half the participants read that under the current governor's leadership, 40% of these jobs had been saved. And they like the current governor. They think he's doing a great job. The rest of the participants read that under the current governor's leadership, 60% of these jobs had been lost. And they don't like the current governor. They think he's doing a terrible job. But then, once more, we added a twist. For participants in the first group, we reframed the information in terms of losses. And now they didn't like the current governor anymore. And for participants in the second group, we reframed the information in terms of gains. But just like in the first study, this didn't seem to matter. People in this group still didn't like the current governor. So notice what this means. Once the loss frame gets in there, it sticks. People can't go back to thinking about jobs saved once they've thought about jobs lost. So in both of these scenarios, actually, the current governor gets ousted in favor of his opponent. Well, at this point, we were getting curious. Why does this happen? Could it be that it's actually mentally harder for people to convert from losses to gains than it is for them to go from gains to losses? So we conducted a third study to test how easily people could convert from one frame to another. This time, we told participants, imagine there's been an outbreak of an unusual disease and 600 lives are at stake. And we asked participants in one group, if 100 lives are saved, how many will be lost? And we asked participants in the other group, if 100 lives are lost, how many will be saved? So everyone just has to calculate 600 minus 100 and come up with the answer of 500. But whereas people in one group have to convert from gains to losses in order to do that, people in the second group have to convert from losses to gains. We timed how long it took them to solve this simple math problem. And what we found was that when people had to convert from gains to losses, they could solve the problem quite quickly. It took them about 7 seconds on average. But when they had to convert from losses to gains, well, now it took them far longer, almost 11 seconds. So this suggests that once we think about something as a loss, that way of thinking about it tends to stick in our heads and to resist our attempts to change it. What I take away from this research and from related research is that our view of the world has a fundamental tendency to tilt toward the negative. It's pretty easy to go from good to bad, but far harder to shift from bad to good. Hi, everyone. Gosh, I wish I could dance, but I can't, and you...
Whoops. Okay. Hopefully you got the idea on that. That idea that we have the power to find a positive part of situation really gives us a chance to take a step that doesn't involve other people's schedules or extra time or physical space. It really has to do with how we frame things in our mind. We're going to go back into our small groups for about 15 minutes and spend some time using the ideas from the video, or maybe from your own experience already, to talk about how we might be able to reframe or see that glass half full aspect of some of the areas of our lives. And by that, I want to make it clear, it's not really about learning to accept the situation or see it as positive. I think the example that I can give from my own life, I have a close family member who has significant addiction issues, drugs and alcohol, and it's very disruptive to our lives in a lot of different ways. But what I've learned over the years is that in my work in social work, because I have that experience in my life, there's a whole lot of other people that when they start to share their experience, I can really empathize with them. I can really understand and resonate with that experience, and even maybe ask questions or frame things in a way that I never would have been able to do without having had that experience. It doesn't mean that I am glad that I have that person with addictions in my life. The addictions are there, but I've been able to recognize the positives, the gifts that are part of that experience. So for the questions in our group, I'd like you to think about the stressful events of 2020 and think about where you can identify positive parts of the experience which have been stressful, things for which you might actually be grateful at this point. And how can you incorporate this shift in thinking, seeing the glimmers of good in difficult events, into your self-care plan? How might I be able to find opportunities to maybe sit back, take that deep breath, and think about what are some potential goods here? What can I take away from this that's actually going to help me in my future? And then again, if time allows, how might this shift in perspective in how you do your work, in how you do things in your everyday work life? So again, the questions are going to be in the chat. Rochelle will put them there for you. And we'd like to invite you to make sure, again, everyone gets a chance to share. This time, let's do it in alphabetical order by last name. So hopefully you'll be able to get a chance to go around and think about this self-care technique of being able to switch and find the good in this challenging situations. So Rochelle, if we're ready, let's go. Rooms, it can be scary to live in 2020. We're all challenging. I hope you had some good times to share some thoughts with your small groups. I thought before we closed for the day that maybe we might take an opportunity, just anybody, share any kind of ahas or insights, anything you got from your small group sharing that you might want to share with the rest of us, to give us thoughts to think about as we go on with our day. You can raise your hand or just shout out. I'm sure we have some extroverts in this group.
I'll share some things. Sorry, this is Vicki. I really liked in our group, I think her name was Madeline, shared how it's the one thing that's been good about COVID is that you realize other people are kind of in the same boat. And and kind of we talked about too that there's been not such a high bar that you feel like you have to live up to that perfection, because everybody's kind of just trying to muddle through this new territory. And so that's kind of been a good thing, that I've tried to put less burden or stress on myself, that maybe if the background behind me isn't always perfectly clean and my kids are kind of being crazy in a meeting or something behind me, that other people understand and they're not as judgmental. So I think that's been good, that other people are kind of in the same boat, so there's more acceptance.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. I think, most of us really put a lot of pressure on ourselves to do well all the time and to kind of keep that strong face forward. And this reality is hitting all of us. As I said at the beginning, we're just human beings working with human beings. And so we have to allow ourselves to have that same permission not to be perfect, like we give everyone else, right? We allow other people to fail, but sometimes we hold ourselves to that high standard. And so just to accept the fact that maybe I'm not going to be my best today, but tomorrow I might be better, right? So thank you so much. Other thoughts?
This didn't come out in my group, but I've said this before to our SWAVO. I'm super grateful that our network has grown so much, because you're not attending these meetings in person. There's so much more flexibility to join into so many more things. And our SWAVO listserv has grown about by 40 people. And
Wow.
we have people on this training that didn't know about SWAVO last year and now are able to join and to meet into this bigger network. So I think that is a really great thing that has occurred.
That's great. Thanks, Rochelle.
I don't think we would have reached out to Resilient Utah had we not, been in such trauma. So we've made great connections.
Yeah. Well, and you use that word, and that did come up in our group, that idea that countering adverse childhood experiences or any trauma, whether we're working with clients or thinking about ourselves, building resiliency is really the way that we learn how to manage those things. And so if we're helping each other become more resilient by being there and walking through this together, then we're helping our whole community become more resilient. Any other final thoughts?
I wanted to share, there is a survey in the chat link. Please just take a couple minutes to fill out that survey, especially if you have any topics that you want for future. We get a lot of great ideas from there. So
that's great. And I just wanted to thank Tally as well for starting us off with such a strong presentation on the data that you have. I was so glad to see that so many of you feel supported in your agencies. That's so important, and that trauma-informed organizations is something that we really support and want to help grow as well. So, this surfer I have here, it feels like we all are riding the wave. We don't know how long it's going to go on. It says you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. So I think that's what I'm hoping for all of us, that we just continue to learn to surf through this, and we will make it out to the other end. So thank you so much for your time and coming and joining us, and just wish you all the best in all your work.
Good. Thank you so much, Mary Beth. I feel better. It looks like the snow has stopped, so your commute home will be a little bit better. But thank you everyone for being here. Enjoy the holidays. Our next SWAVO will be in March, and it will also be virtual. We've kind of made that decision. We're not quite there, but it's looking hopeful to getting in person again, but hopefully summer 2021. So thank you. Take care. I'll stick around if you have any questions.